Hello and welcome to another episode of A Tour of Vintage, where I take vintage metagame decks through a league, discuss deck lists, discuss card choices, and finally evaluate them at the end. This time we're going to explore Tinker PO. So basically it's a blue Tinker variant that tries to overwhelm the opponent using card advantage. As its only win conditions, it has one Urza Saga, one Karn Great Creator, and either a Sphinx or a Blightsteel Colossus on the sideboard. There's also a couple of Old Breachers on the sideboard to bring in against fair decks. It is a deck that is not as greedy in the mana base as other Esper versions. It also plays only one copy of Urza Saga, so it's much less mana intensive than other versions of PO. It plays a main board Sphinx, which is great against heavy creature decks and decks that can otherwise not remove the Sphinx, for example by using Force of Vigor or similar. So it does give you some protection against Artifact 8. Obviously it has the full component of counter spells. It has Yawgmoth's Will, it has 2 slow tutors, it has a demonic tutor, it has 2 Sensei's Divining Top, and Sensei's Divining Top has a cool interaction with PO where we're able to draw an extra card if you leave the PO trigger on the stack and you draw a card using top in response, so you're able to draw 1 extra card from your PO. Karn is great against opposing artifact decks, obviously, but is able to combo off by fetching a Mycosynth Lattice and basically locking the opponent out of the game. We have a few graveyard hate pieces in the sideboard, and we have a Blightsteel Colossus, an alternative win con to the Sphinx when it's needed. It was overall a very fun deck to play. Hope you guys enjoy. I want to apologize in advance that I'm doing a voiceover because I lost the voice track for this recording. It also took me a hell of a lot more time than usual. So if you guys appreciate it, please don't forget to subscribe below. Leave any comments. It would be great to hear that actually people are using my content to their advantage. So just paste your thoughts below and hope you enjoy the video. Welcome to another installment of A Tour of Vintage. This time I'm playing Tinker PO. I am doing this voiceover after recording because I realized I had forgotten to turn on my mic the last time. So we started with a hand that doesn't really work, so I'm shipping this hand off. So here we have a marginally functioning hand. Not particularly fond of it, but I do have some permission. I have a Ponder to dig down for more action. I have a starting artifact, and I have 2 lands. So I'm keeping this and say go. Opponent fires off a Pluto Delta and fetches an island. Then ponders, makes me think they're on some sort of fairish blue or combo blue deck. I drew Time Walk and just went ahead and fetched an island and pondered away. It's pretty good off the top. A little few difficult decisions here. I decided to get the 2 artifacts and get rid of the Force of Will with my fetch a couple of turns later. In order to see if I can dig for some more action. I already have an active force, so this was a decision that was taken in that aspect. Opponent then leads with a Soul Ring and a Soul Guide Lantern, which makes me think that the opponent is some sort of Urza's Saga deck, and then they drop the actual Urza's Saga. Onto my turn, I did the play I wanted to do, get my other artifact in. Now Mox Opal is live. I have a Force of Will, I have an Orcus Recall, which is going to be quite handy against the opposing Urza Saga, and I just time walk to see what's going on. I draw into Brainstorm, decide just to pass the turn to keep a live force up, Hardcast, being able to just do Brainstorm at the end of the opponent's turn. Opponent continues to develop the game, but nothing really goes on, and I Brainstorm at the end. Here's some very interesting Brainstorm. I did get a scroll on Yawgmoth's Will in the land. What I should have done was actually to stack it so I would draw first into Yawgmoth's Will and then Merchant Scroll away the land by searching my library. But either I misclicked or I missed that play. So I'm just going to Merchant Scroll away for an Ancestral Recall. The Ancestral netted me pretty good cards. One more counter spell. I have a top to start digging for some action. And I'm feeling pretty confident at this step. I can get rid of the Urza Saga constructs by using the Urkel's Recall. I'm pretty protected with the Force of Will and the Flusterstorm. And I can use top to basically try to dig for my win conditions, card draw, etc. Opponent then tinkers, and my thought process here is, should I counter it or not? Having Hercule's Recall in hand, I can just get rid of any artifacts that might come into play. Opponent does fetch a Mana Crypt, which is a little weird play from my opponent, so I'm not entirely sure. They might have in hand their win condition, Bolas. So overall, it was not a very excellent tinker from my opponent's part. After the Gitaxian Probe and the actions of my opponent, spinning and drawing a card and spinning again, made me really understand that my opponent couldn't really deal with the Oracle's Recall at this point. So, pretty good position to be in. Now playing the top and spinning it reveals actually Dress Down, which is quite interesting because it's another Oracle's Recall almost, and my own win condition, as in Urza's Saga. I decided to stack it so that I would have Dress Down, fetch first, then the Saga, and finally the Opal. So here, opponent plays the Bolas Citadel, and I don't really have mana for Hercule's Recall, therefore I'm forced to use my Force of Will and pitching the Hercule's Recall to counter the Bolas Citadel. Spin in top reveals a PO that I gladly put on top, so I can also have a backup with Flusterstorm the turn after. That PO could have been cast on upkeep, therefore avoiding taking 1 damage from the Mana Vault. But either way, I'm in a pretty good position here to continue advancing my board. PO draws my win condition and another paradoxical outcome. Casting the second PO actually reveals a more interesting play, which is going for Karn and Lockwin. So I'll just scout ahead, see if the coast is free, and then play Karn. That was the win. For sideboarding, I mainly took away Sphinx, Slow Tutors, and Yagmoth's Will in preparation for, Graveyard 8 coming out of Urza Saga. And then I bring in Hullbreacher, Flusterstorm, and a couple of Artifact 8 cards. I also was considering Defense Grid if I should bring it in or not in this matchup, and I decided to take it anyway. We start game 2 with a very slow hand that probably needs to be shipped in. After taking a mulligan, we actually see that there is turn 1 Tinker, which is great. Decide to keep her. No permission though, but if the Tinker enters, then we're good to go. Seeing PO off the top makes me want to play a little bit more conservatively and hope to draw into a Force of Will. Opponent is not putting any pressure on us. Therefore, we start pondering to see if we can actually find that piece of permission we need to get either our Tinker through or our PO through. If nothing else goes, we still have Urza Saga to basically put some pressure on our opponent. We get top out of Ponder, which is a great draw to start manipulating the top of our deck. It's not super optimal that we didn't find any piece of permission on the top 3 cards. Opponent used the Mind Rake Trap. Okay, we just pass the turn and go. This point, opponent is not really doing much, which makes me wonder that opponent has a counterspell in hand. So I try to play a little bit more conservatively and hope to just deploy my Urza Saga and start dropping constructs. Drawing a demonic 34th turn makes us want to find a Mox Jet so that we can actually find permission. Although we're in a pretty good spot, opponent might have Oracle's Recall in hand, but we'll see. And there it is. I suspected that this is much, but it seems that our tutor is going through. Having resolved Demonic Tutor and knowing that a million spells already been played this turn, I briefly considered Flusterstorm, but opponent is sitting with a lot of mana. Therefore, I thought the best choice would be a Force of Will, and then try to PO out of this. In hindsight, probably the Force of Storm would have been a better choice. So I'm left with no mana now, and I'm forced to pass the turn. The Mox is definitely not an ideal draw, and I end up not having enough mana for both Tinker and Force of Will. So once again, I am in waiting. Then finally, opponent drew into their own PO. I try to counter it, but they have counterspell backup, and they chain a bunch of POs together and eventually cast the Karn that makes me lose this game, basically. So very few Urza Saga, which makes me think the opponent is playing probably just one, same as me. So I put back my Yawgmoth's Well. Okay. So now game 3, I keep a hand that is very dependent on Urza Saga, and had it been any other Moxen would have been slightly less risky. I'm not exactly sure it was the right keep. But I do have Force of Will and a Mental Misstep for protection. If I draw at least one artifact more, I can start deploying tokens with Urza Saga, and then my Mox Opal is suddenly live. So here things start being interesting. I didn't Mental Misstep the Soul Ring, probably by mistake. But it was good because I was able to actually get rid of the pitting needle. Since Urza is an integral component of my actual beatdown plan, I am tempted to just come here and force it. Now I see a sensei off the top. Have to spin it to see if there's some action going on. Can I actually activate my Saga or not? I end up not having enough mana. Cards off the top are not optimal. I'm not entirely sure why Defense Grid is here. But I do see 2 lands and Defense Grid. I decide to stack the lands on the bottom and Defense Grid on top to draw it next turn. And play the Defense Grid. My thought was I could then Yawgmoth's Will to get back the Urza Saga and preventing the opponent from countering my Yawgmoth. Playing the Defense Grid, now I have the Mox Opal active. I spin the top and I see a Demonic Tutor, which is pretty nice. So it makes me think maybe I can go and find something that I want this turn since Defense Grid is up. I'm done on cards, so I want to probably get an Ancestral Recall at this point. So I'm able to actually cast it twice using Yawgmoth's Will next turn. Ancestral finds instead a Hull Breacher, which is very interesting because now I suddenly am in a more card advantage position than the opponent, and I have a Defense Grid up, so I want to prevent the opponent from actually drawing cards with PO. So that's what I'm going to play. Okay, having enough mana now for casting Yawgmoth's Will and Urza Saga, obviously, and also Ancestral Recall. Karn with my Demonic Tutor and playing a new turn basically solves the game. Especially drawing at this point a Force of Will. So we just go ahead and deploy Karn, Force of Will backup, and Defense Grid. And we win the game. Here we start round 2. We have a pretty decent hand with a counterspell. We can eventually get to a PO, and we have some card draw and lands. So we keep it. PO reveals quite decent cards at the top. So we decide to draw into the Mana Crypt and start deploying our game plan. One then drops an Urza Saga. We probably think it's another mirror, but then they play a Sphere of Resistance, which cannot enter the game. Urza's Recall is an excellent play against our opponent, and since we probably don't have any counter spells against us, we can just PO and go for it. We have a Sphinx, which we eventually will be able to cast with this Black Lotus. So we think we're in a good position, especially with the Hercus Recall. One of them plays a Strip Mine. It's probably being kept to target our Urza Saga. Jokes on them, we only have one. And we're able to actually hard cast the Sphinx. Turn 3. Great deck. Opponent continues developing the board with Urza Saga, unknowingly that we have an Oracle's Recall in hand. And a PO for card draw. But currently PO is only drawing us 2 cards, so it's not super interesting. And then attacks with Construct. I'm not entirely sure how the opponent is going to pump the Construct, so I believe I can safely block here and win the combat. We drew a 3rd artifact, which makes our PO slightly more attractive. We go ahead and draw a few cards. We get an Urza Saga, but not much more. We currently are in a good advantage with both the Sphinx and Oracle's Recall in hand, so we continue to play our regular game. At this point, opponent clearly believes that they are able to just overpower my Sphinx by just having really big constructs in play and the Nettle Cyst. Unfortunately, I have the card that makes it all moot. Karn is problematic here, so has to leave the table. I don't want to get locked out of attacking using Karn. Off the top reveals a few interesting cards. I'm able to just basically get another turn right now and probably lock the game from here. On to match 2. So here we're actually looking forward to cutting Bola Citadel because I'm probably taxed on my spells and bring in all Artifact 8. And in order to replace Bola Citadel, I'm actually taking out, I'm putting in Blightsteel Colossus. Also taking out a few of the slower cards because we really have to be fast enough deploying our board in order to not to get overpowered by the opponent. This hand, unfortunately, is a bit difficult to play. I have 0 mana to start with. This is slightly better, putting the big artifact down, of course. A Null Rod here makes me consider countering it, but Null Rod is gonna hurt my opponent as much as me. And I do hope to draw into a Hurkyl's Recall to get rid of my opponent's tokens eventually. Panen Ground Sea here is great, because this means I can basically fetch the Hurkyl's Recall I need. So I deploy a couple more artifacts, so I can do Hurkyl's plus PO, hopefully, the turn after. Golem will make my heart slightly more difficult, because I will now have attacks in everything I play. So I decide just to go for the Hurkyl's line as fast as possible. On my turn, I go with the Urzus first, so I can do Hurkyl's and then start deploying tokens. That's my line of play. I still have a Force backup with my PO if needed. My opponent playing this sphere opens up for some interesting lines, so it'll be very difficult for my opponent to deploy his hand. So I'll just Hurkyl's now at this point. So now this was a great draw, a Tinker off the top, which will just let me fetch my win condition. And here we are for round 3 of playing Tinker PO. If you're enjoying this content, please don't forget to subscribe and leave any comments if you think it's worth it. We are going to play this game against Dredge. I don't know yet at this point, but I do have a very fast hand, and I have a detection probe, so I'll be able to see what the opponent is doing. So this is a keep. Casting the detection probe really shows that I'm against a Dredge with a Bazaar hand, and I did draw my Sphinx, so my Tinker target that would help in some way is not here. My only hope now is to be able to cast my PO, because I have enough mana to do so this turn, and hopefully go faster than the Dredge player in winning the game. Fortunately, my bullets whiffed really hard. And this is where you really see if the Sphinx were still in my deck, I would probably had a very good chance of winning. But like this, I mean, there's not much I can do here. So I'll just let the game play. Opponent has a really good first turn, is able to strip mine my island as well, and things are not looking great at this point. That's for sure. At this point, I'm not really sure what I'm looking for, but I don't think I really have any outs from Dredge, at least main deck, and my life total is getting dangerously low. So this game one is just a loss. Okay, for sideboard, so I bring in all the graveyard hate package, and I replace that with forces, slow tutors, and Hercule's recall, which are useless in this matchup. I considered briefly bringing in the Colossus, but decided against it. In hindsight, I think it might have been a good call, but I didn't bring it in. So my initial hand has a turn 1 Tinker, and it further has a tutor for finding whatever else I need the remaining of the turns, so I just go for it. So I go for the obvious target of Sphinx to start my game. Go for a PO. Try to dig for some graveyard hate. Slow Dredge down enough so I can beat down with my Sphinx. That's my initial plan at least. And I did find 2 hate pieces. Now I should have played one of them at least before attacks, because I'm giving the opponent one more creature here, but it ended up playing my Soul Guardian Lantern, moving the opponent's graveyard. I continue POing, find a stop, find another Dredge hate piece, and I'm not sure the opponent can get out of this at this moment. So it's probably going to go for game. Game 3, I decide that Citadel is too costly to keep, so I replace it for a Colossus, which is probably the right move. I should have done it in game 2. So here this hand actually doesn't have any hate, and it shouldn't be a keepable hand, but I was basically sidetracked by all the fast mana. Preordain reveals an Urza Saga, which is a bit too slow against this matchup, so I end up shipping it down and just play all my fast mana. My left total is suddenly being pressed very fast. And the opponent casts Caval Therapy, targeting my PO, and that leaves that line out of the field. Drawing now my hate piece. My opponent has already lethal on board, so this is a game. So we're starting now the round 4. We're playing against Discoveran, so I know for sure they are on Doomsday. I have a hand with one fast mana artifact at Laren Academy as well. I have ways to get Ancestral Recall if needed, but I have no permission. But I still consider that it's a fair enough 7 that might get there, especially with the Brainstorm and a Ponder in hand. So I keep this. Ponder reveals a hand that still doesn't have the permission pieces I'm looking for, and I have no way of casting PO. So I choose to shuffle and draw into more artifacts in this case. Finding a few more artifacts this turn leads me to think that the right line of play right now is to go for PO, using the merchant scroll. and trying to fire it off. I still have Brainstorm to be able to dig for something if needed. But it comes an empty. I did draw into Ancestral Recall, but having a way to cast it this turn, I just let it go. So here I'll try to just get the card advantage as fast as possible before Doomsday has time to settle up. Follows a really nice interaction where the Doomsday player responds with their own Ancestral, and I basically dig 2 time for a counter spell and end up getting dazed with my Ancestral Recall. I did draw into a Narset, which will prevent the opponent from going off in 1 turn. And let's hope that the opponent has nothing on their own turn. So Preordain here revealed the piece of permission that I kind of needed to resolve my Narset. So I just go ahead and play the Narset. And my Force of Will backup is able to get Narset through. I believe my opponent is also on top deck mode right now. So I want to dig as fast as possible for my own combo before my opponent gets. Narset actually reveals a very interesting choice of cards. I could either take the PO or the Yawgmoth's Will, but I believe that Yawgmoth's will actually net me more cards since I have a PO in the yard anyway. And the opponent just scoops after this. For sideboarding, then we go with a Toolhole Breaches and removing the Sphinx and Repeal, which probably the Sphinx is just too slow to combat Doomsday. Game 2 shows a hand with Soul Ring, a top, enough mana to cast PO eventually, and a piece of permission, so that's a great start. So I draw actually into a Nurse's Saga that will allow me to start putting some pressure into my opponent. So that's what I'm playing. And deploying a Soul Ring. Spinning the top reveals Time Walk, the artifact which I don't want to draw now, Bolas Citadel. But I actually have a fetch land that is able to take Bolas Citadel down away from the top. My opponent tries to resolve Doomsday. I need to force it, but obviously it gets countered, so it resolves. Looking through the opponent's pile, I realize that they kept Black Lotus, 2 Oracles, 1 Ancestral Recall, 1 Gush, 1 Force of Will, and 1 Flusterstorm. That should match the cards they have in hand. I'm unsure how much permission they have in hand. So my outs here actually come up pretty fast into being dressed down to answer Thassa's Oracle. But I also need a piece of permission so that I can resolve my dress down. Ideally, I need 2 dress downs. So I don't really need to pressure opponent that hard now with my constructs, because I don't have a 1-turn kill anyway. So I decided to just keep the mana up. Opponent is playing a slow game in order to be sure that they deliver their combo. Spinning the top reveals not the cards I'm looking for. I decided to keep a preordain up on top and basically ship the other 2 cards down in the next turn by casting the draw into another preordain. I need the blue mana to be up, so I just passed it. One goes for the Gush play, so they have a lot of mana live. Makes it slightly difficult for me to go over their counter spells with the current cards. Answer now to Thassa's Oracle will be a Dress Down. Dress Down resolves, which makes me think that the opponent probably has Flusterstorm in hand and not Force of Will. And now I need to dig down for another Dress Down in order. I have to play my fetch, get rid of the cards on top, and try to dig for something more. The other Dress Down is still not on top. I do find 2 POs and I have to fire them off now. Hopefully my opponent has no live counter spells. Play all my fast mana and then chain once again the other PO that was on top. This time drawing 3 cards. Unfortunately, my opponent had a Mindbreak Trap in hand, which missed my initial evaluation of cards they could have kept. Therefore, they won. We have a pretty keepable hand now. We're 1 mana away from casting one of the 2 POs. And we have basically 3 pieces of permission. We draw a Narset, but with no mana to cast it. Opponent did get to see my hand with the Git Probe, and it's likely that they don't have enough to out-counter myself. I drew an Ancestral Recall, but having no additional mana to cast Flusterstorm to protect it, decide to just pass a turn. The opponent saw an opening for casting their own Doomsday. I believe my best out of here is just to fluster Doomsday right away. But I completely forgot about Dark Ritual, which was not optimal. The best course of action is just let my opponent pay for the 3 mana, then they having no blue mana to cast First Storm, try to Force of Will it, and we're outside of Mindbreak Trap territory. As opponent gushes, we can't really force this, because as I mentioned, we'll run right into a Mindbreak Trap, so we just have to let it happen and hope that there's no Force of Wills, and there wasn't. So we not getting the mana we need. We have to pass the turn and hope for the best. Gets to Flusterstorm our Ancestral Recall, which we cast in response to Preordain. We do have mana to play and a force of will, but that would kind of negate our card advantage. So I would just let it go and hope that we can just jam a Narset next turn. We do find the land we needed to put the Narset down, and this will prevent one turn. Very important that our Narset resolves, so we have to protect it. On a dress down, which is probably one of the best cards in this matchup, since it dodges so much of the removal that the Doomsday player can offer us. They do get to go off with their Doomsday, but are unable to combo this turn, so they'll have to play past the turn, and we have a dress down to be prepared for. It seems my opponent has kept 2 Oracles in his pile. No Black Lotus, Ancestral Gush. Obviously I have a Narset in play. Probably a Force of Will and Necropotence. Flusterstorm and probably an Underground Sea or a fetch. Opponent has 3 cards in hand, so it's not exactly sure what they have. From Narset, I don't have enough mana to be casting What's Will or the Tutor, so Max Sapphire is the obvious pick. Also leaves me open for a PO, end of turn, the opponent. As expected, the opponent is then getting his Necropotence out. I'm able to put a counterspell on top and draw into it using PO. Playing Narset reveals the second dress down, and I believe my opponent has no outs to this situation. So here we are for the last round. The first hand is obviously not a keep, and we ship it, and we do find turn 1 Tinker hand, no permission, but hopefully it'll be enough against our. Since we haven't found any permission and Tinker is kind of my only win condition at this point, the goal here is to dig using a top for something that will help protect our Tinker. Ancestral is a great draw from drop that will help us replenish our hand. It's also a great bait for a counter spell. So we fetch Ancestral, try to cast it. As expected, opponent had a Force of Will, so then we just go ahead and. Unfortunately, opponent has the second force, but that leaves them at 1 card in hand. Seed of Synod there clearly shows that they're in the blue affinity deck. I'm pretty confident with an active top that I'll be able to dig for something more interesting fast. So putting the fetch land on top allows me to just filter out the stuff I don't want to have on top, and I'll just continue trying to set up a good draw. This is a very interesting top. I do want all the cards that are here. I also want to set up probably a Force of Will without having to pitch cards. So my goal is to have Tolarian Academy as my next draw, being able to top for Force of Will if needed or draw it naturally. And I still have my dress down backup to prevent card draw from my opponent, for example. I should try to stop my opponent from getting card advantage, because being the Thoughtcast blue affinity deck, they just do have some explosive turns. So I'll fetch for the Force of Will and realize I can't pay for it, so I have to pitch a card. Casting Urza here puts me in a very difficult spot. I do try to spin it, get a dig to time, find nothing really useful, but get a Narset up to hand, plus the top. Fortunately, the Pithing Nader my opponent plays now invalidates my top and leaves me in a little bit of a tricky situation. Heal here buys me a little bit more time, even though the draw was not up. Citadel an opponent with 18 life is not a good deal for me. So once again, Force of Will it. My Narset is almost dying. I need to urgently draw something. Draw PO. Unfortunately, the opponent had Counterspell in hand. Finally, I get my break on my turn. Double card draw draws me a tutor, which then fetches me Karn, which then seals. sideboarding, I take away the dress downs and the Sphinx to bring in additional Hull Breacher, Hercule's Recall to protect myself against artifacts. So dress down would be great against Urza Saga, but I haven't seen Urza Saga from my opponent, so I wonder if they just... Second game shows two abysmal hands that have to be shipped back, finally accepting a okay-ish 5-hander, but no counter spells whatsoever, and I'm on the play. In hindsight, it was great to have shipped the Sensei's Dividing Top, since that's what the opponent did. A Tinker here is a quite good draw. I will try to get card advantage first. And is shipping up quite nicely. Unfortunately, I have no permission. But I could try putting a Karn, but obviously I'm afraid of counterspells from the opponent's side. This brainstorm still reveals no counterspells. At this point, I'm not entirely sure why I kept the Hull Breacher. I might have just kept the PO, since I'm gonna ship it off anyway. PO plus 4 artifacts is quite nice. I was mainly afraid of counterspells, which materialize now once I try to cast my... Let's go ahead with Tinker and hope that it will go through. Get my Bullet Citadel. I see a PO at the top. Go for it. And the opponent has a Hercule's Recall on the crackback. But actually this allowed me to cast Hercule's Recall on the opponent. Finally have a Karn in play and a Hercules Recall backup. Makes me quite confident that this game is winnable. This is unless the opponent has counterspells. This basically leaves the opponent sealed out, and that was a 4-1 with Tinker PO. So overall this was quite an interesting deck, extremely powerful. I think I was quite lucky with the matchups as well. No opponent was really delivering a lot of pressure to me. Having basically the only win conditions as Urza Saga and Tinker and Karn was often enough to just win games. I was surprised there was no other combo finish, no more Urza Saga. Only one Urza Saga. I think it's a great amount. I really didn't have the need to delay my game plan by putting Urza Saga in play and trying to win the game by construct beatdown. So often it was just better to develop my game board and just draw a lot of cards and just overwhelm the opponent on card advantage. Never really got to play the fence grid that often. I'm unsure where it would fit anyway. But overall I'm quite satisfied with the deck and it was a great run. Thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy these videos. I am sorry that this had to be a voiceover. Unfortunately, I did lose the initial voice track I had, but I hope it was enjoyable nonetheless. Thank you.